Slowhands Rock Talk Show.
Looking to get a professional website built at an affordable cost? Then look no further. Nova Web Design offers you all the services required to put your business on the map. Whether it's website redesign, website development or website maintenance, it's all here and more. Click the link in the description for more info. Before the video starts, if you could do me a huge favour and make sure that you have subscribed to the channel. It's free, it only takes seconds to do, and it really does help the channel continue to grow. Now on to the video. Todd, thank you so much for making a bit of time out of your morning to come onto the podcast, speak to myself all about music. As I just said there, we will speak about music for yourself. We'll talk about the bands that you're playing in and anything else that comes up as well. But before we get started, how are you actually doing?
Doing great. I'm technically a day off today, though my days are never really off. I'm preparing for an upcoming tour. So I've got a bunch of stuff coming up. So I'm perpetually sort of compartmentalizing this, and this while I'm, sort of like sitting here drinking coffee and hanging out in my studio, as you can see. Yeah.
Sounds like you're maybe spinning a few plates.
It always seems to be that way. It's funny because people come at me months in advance and say, are you available on this day or this time period? And I'm always sort of like, well, yeah, when it's that far in advance. And then as things start to other calls come in and things get sort of filled in. And then suddenly by the time you reach, you'll find yourself, oh, wow, I got to be preparing for 2 or 3 things. It's a good problem to have. I really have no complaints about it.
Yeah.
It sort of drives my wife crazy. But other than that, it's sort of, because I'll be like, oh, man, my head's spinning from I have to have this ready and have that ready. But, it's one of those things where if I could tell my 14-year-old self that this will be your future, you're going to be, playing with Triumph on a 50th anniversary tour and then going on a cruise with Michael Monroe from Hanoi Rocks and all these things that, I've been very, very fortunate to play with people like Slash and whatnot that are Bruce Kulick from Kiss and these kind of people that are like, for lack of better words, heroes of mine. It's kind of strange from this vantage point because it becomes sort of normal, but it's never quite lost on me how important these people are and how important they were to me in my formative years.
Yeah. Well, talking about that, what I like to do with all the guests is I do go back to the very beginning. So where originally are you from?
I'm from Canada, a very small town, Canada, right in the middle of Canada, Saskatchewan, Canada, actually. I spent a good chunk of my childhood in northern Canada, northern Manitoba. So it was quite remote, quite removed from any cities or concerts or anything like that. So music was, something we'd find never really accessible. I mean, talking about like the 70s, essentially.
Yeah.
When I was a child. So music was something you saw on a lack of television in northern Canada at that time. So things like, I'm trying to think what we would have seen. But all these sort of, in the UK, there was like the Old Grey Whistle Test. There was Top of the Pops. We had our sort of versions of that came through, that existed in Canada or were filtered in from the United States for us. So seeing music and finding music was sort of probably much later because of the nature of our geography. But it was something that we, you find your parents' old record collections and off you go. Once we moved back to Saskatchewan, which you'll have to look at a map later to make sense of all this. But we were outside of a town called Saskatoon, about an hour and 10 minutes outside of the city. So then I could suddenly find myself around 13 years old, 14, whatever, going into the city to see proper concerts and proper bands would breeze through. It was small enough still that a lot of bands would just completely fly over, or just travel through. But it was one of the,
I was going to say, it's funny the way you're talking about how you accessed music back then. I'm younger than yourself, but I'm mid-40s, so I'm still of the generation where the internet didn't come out until I was in my 20s.
Right.
You know, so I still, you know, like most people, like yourself, you know, you get introduced to music from your parents' old record collection, and then you start to discover bands for yourself, bands that you like. And but, you know, the internet didn't exist, so you couldn't just go on YouTube and type in what you wanted. It's something I get very jealous of the younger generation nowadays, but at the same time, it's almost like they maybe don't appreciate it because it's just always been there. But to find a live video of a band that you enjoyed, or that, I mean, that was something really great back then, a VHS videotape before DVDs. You know?
Yeah, no, it was, I mean, even to this day, I'm looking around at records, and even seeing your favorite artists in three-dimensional form or in moving form was bizarre, because Kiss or whoever you loved, you just had a record and you stared at the album cover and listened to the record. So if they suddenly played the video for like some video, they wouldn't even call them videos back then, but there were promo clips for all kinds of songs. And eventually, like, you know, by like 79, they had like I Was Made for Loving You that they would play on like American Bandstand and stuff like that. So to actually see them moving, you know, it was sort of like, well, I mean, obviously we'd seen the Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, their movie and things like this. So
I know what you're saying, though, because the first time I saw Metallica, it's almost like my mind was blown, because I was so used to them just being a poster on my wall.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, because even back then, I don't know if I'd seen much video footage of them. I'd obviously had their music, and there would be posters on the wall, but you weren't used to them actually being real people. And then all of a sudden you're at a concert and James Hetfield just stood in front of you.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is the guy that's on my wall. This is crazy.
Yeah, and now it's, you could, I mean, I do it sometimes where I'll be like, I wonder what was in the set list in, you know, whatever, you know, like Metallica in 1994, and just punch in, you know, Metallica concert 94, and something will come up, and you'll be like, damn, dude, if this was so accessible like that, I probably would have, I think like anybody, it's easy to say it would be taken for granted, but I think like most of us, people are finding music in however they find it in any form. So when I was a kid, finding, say, the Rolling Stones or something like that, you know, or going through a phase of loving a band like that, you could easily, or Led Zeppelin or whoever, you know, it'd be like these bands, by the time I found them, had like bands like, but it was particularly bands like Led Zeppelin and The Who. I mean, Bonham was probably already gone. Keith Moon was probably already gone.
Yep.
So there was this wealth of material. So you'd find a record or hear a song and go to the record shop, if you're lucky enough to have access to a record shop. In a small town, it's just some random, you know, place that sells everything, you know, sells, there's groceries over there, there's, you know, shoes over here, and then there's a sort of small record section. And you'd go, you know, there'd be like The Who or whoever, and you'd be like 100 albums, and you wouldn't even know where to start, you know? Mm-hmm. So, but that was kind of the awesome thing about it. The Stones, all those bands had been around for so long. The Beatles, the entire, you know, the Beatles right now, or whether it was 1985 or 2025, the collection of Beatles records is still those records. So you could just go in and buy one and go, wow, and then go back and buy another. And that's basically what we did. My brother and I, we had, our allowance basically was spent on records. I think we used to combine our allowance, because we only got like, I can't remember how much we got as an allowance every week, but we'd go out. Initially, when we were children, it was comic books and candy and nonsense, and eventually it was records. And then, and I think like anybody, whether it's now or then, I think when a person finds music, it's easy to say, oh, this kid's got it so good, they can just go punch in Van Halen 1983 and watch a concert. But at the same time, I think that it doesn't take away from the fact that when you find your thing, even if it's a brief thing, because we all have periods in our life where we find music and are obsessed with an artist, and then it's sort of like you ingested it and you moved on to whatever the next thing was, especially when things are coming at you in real time. Because finding things like the Beatles or whatever was such a cool experience, but it was something that had already happened. You know, it was sort of like looking through the rear view mirror, or looking at the rear view mirror at something that has already come and gone. And as that's happening and something is new and meant just for your generation and just for your ears. And so once that door was open, then music just sort of came flying. I was the oldest sibling, so I didn't have the benefit of having the older siblings who were like, here's Alice Cooper or Aerosmith or whatever. Yeah. But I would go to my friends' houses and they'd be like, yeah, my, they'd have an older sister or something. And I'd be going, and just records would be sitting there and I would just go through them. A lot of them were always the same records. It was always fascinating because I was a child and it'd be like Frampton Comes Alive, Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, things like that. There were always sort of the same records in these collections because they were very popular records at that time. But having older, aunts and uncles and stuff like that, when the technology started to shift maybe into, I don't know if it was quite compact discs yet, but a lot of people had just kind of moved on and they weren't listening to their records as much. So they'd be like, yeah, you could take any of those. Yeah. And I'd be like, what? I would take boxes of records home from aunts and uncles and stuff like that. And some of it would be like, not for me, but I'd find things like Cream or groups like that never really kind of grabbed me, but there was definitely cool stuff on those records. And
I think the cool thing about nowadays is, like, my dad introduced me to a lot of the bands he grew up on. They're all classic bands. So The Who, The Doors, The Beatles, Led Zeppelin. Yeah.
The four major food groups.
However, if you take the Rolling Stones aside, most of those bands, they didn't last very long. They left a great amount of music, but most of them, by the time I was born, they were already split up or there was members who had passed away.
Exactly, yeah.
The cool thing about nowadays, there'll be people that fell in love with Guns N' Roses in the mid-80s, but you can still go and see Guns N' Roses today. You can still go and see Slash. I mean, me and my dad liked a lot of the same music, but we couldn't go and see a lot of the bands because they no longer existed. Whereas the thing about nowadays is it is a lifelong, there are bands that can make it like a lifelong sort of journey for them. It's really cool because there's a lot of those great bands from years ago. The music's brilliant, but they didn't last very long. I don't know why that was.
Yeah, like you say, it's like Jim Morrison was gone, Keith Moon was gone, John Bonham was gone. I like bands like Led Zeppelin or The Doors, just that wasn't a thing. They just weren't touring. I mean, there might have been some version of Robert Plant touring or something like that, but you're right. It's kind of like now to live in 2026 and you can go and see the Eagles or whoever. It's sort of like, or some version thereof. I mean, even though those versions of the bands often have a lot of people who have passed on or have been replaced or whatever, it's sort of like, I mean, it's the most interesting thing that music can be celebrated far after someone is gone. When you think about how long ago Jim Morrison, right? Even the other day I saw that new Elvis movie in the theater and I thought to myself, next year Elvis will be gone 50 years. And I'm sitting in a movie theater with a bunch of people going, watching a Elvis, and I think it's the only thing that makes you immortal is music and film. It just sort of lives on, or books or whatever.
Yeah, I think Jim Morrison was 1971.
I know, that's mind-boggling, isn't it? Yeah, it's like, even Cliff Burton or something like that. Like from Metallica, the fact that Metallica carried on in so many ways, and there are people who will swear that their best music was made with Cliff Burton. They're probably not wrong in many ways, but it's sort of like. It's like within 3 albums, Cliff Burton was gone. So
it's funny you say that though, because a lot of people will say their best albums were with Cliff Burton. Mm-hmm. But to me, I think it's probably when I discovered them, it was always Jason Newsted for myself.
Yes,
because that's the band I discovered.
Yeah,
when I was 11 years old, whatever it was.
And then people will be there are people who. I don't like Metallica since they replaced Jason. There's always change happening and that kind of stuff just happens. Yeah.
Talking about concerts, what was the first professional concert that you ever attended?
When I finally moved back to just outside the city, I got to see Loverboy, the most Canadian concert of all time, was Loverboy with Bryan Adams opening. Bryan Adams was still new enough that he was still in an opening position. I was very young. I was just a kid, but it was a big deal because it was I've played that venue since a couple of times, which is a real,
Yeah.
You look out at the audience and go, like, I was sitting right around there, which is bizarre. But,
Yep.
it was a big deal. It had a massive impact on me because, being Canadian, Loverboy was, they were a big deal in general. They had hits at the time. They were sort of an international act. And I've gotten to know those guys over the years too. So it's really cool. But yeah, and that sort of started a steady stream because I was just at that age where it was like, then it was just concerts almost every week, shows all the time. And I lost track of how many shows I probably saw as within junior high school into high school, that kind of thing.
I do think the live experience, it's really is something that everyone should experience at the very least once in their life, because it's such a magical experience. Like yourself, I don't know how many gigs I've been to now over the years. I've been going to concerts for 30 plus years, but I still feel the exact same nowadays that I did when I was a teenager. I still love it. I still get excited about going. I love the build-up. I love when it's the opening tune, when the band walks on stage, when they play your favourite song. It's something that everybody should experience. It's such a great thing to be part of, whether you're in the audience or whether you're on stage. It's just everybody under the one roof for that 2 hours. They're on the same page. Your problems disappear. It is a magical experience that everyone should at least experience once in their life.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes in a live context, you'll see something or somebody who's not really your jam, not really your kind of thing. And that might grab you, like there's been multiple times, I think you could probably attest to the same thing, going to see somebody and their opening act you've never heard of, or you're only vaguely familiar with. And then you see them live and it just grabs you. It's like, that's the cool thing about seeing live music. And it's funny that you said at least once in your life. I can't imagine the idea like, I saw a concert once. It's like, what?
There is people out there that don't even, they don't listen to music. I find that strange myself, but I mean, everyone's different, I suppose.
It's kind of like sports, or sport. It's sort of like, some people are just, I don't follow. When I was younger, it's sort of like that for me now, because you get to an age where you're like, it's hard to relate to following athletes because you're old enough to be their dad, and then it's sort of like you kind of lose this sort of shine of like, you'll always support the team you love, but you don't quite as passionately sort of support it. But yeah, I've always had friends who sort of like, and it was really hard for me because of being so excited and into music. I just took it so seriously, but I did have a lot of friends who just sort of, it was kind of like a snack or something like that. They just enjoyed that song. They don't know who the bass player of the band is. They don't need to know all of their records. They just like that song and they like the couple of songs, and then they just go on to the next thing. It's just, and it was really hard for me to wrap my head around that because I was surrounded by other friends who were equally as obsessed with music as I was. But I get it. It's, I don't fully get it, but I guess different strokes for different folks, you know what I'm saying?
It is what it is, but I know, am I right in saying your first instrument was the guitar?
Yeah, I got an acoustic guitar. My father had an acoustic guitar, and he showed me a few chords, how it is. And then very quickly picked up a bass, so it was, and even then, by the time I got a bass, I could barely play guitar. It was just sort of like my dad thought, what we should do? We should go buy a bass. And I was like, I barely even knew. I knew Paul McCartney was the bass player, and that's basically where I was at. And then that sort of opened a whole bunch of doors because of no one wanted to be a bass player, basically. Everybody wants to be the guitar player, the drummer, or the lead singer, and bass player was always kind of an afterthought. But especially being a bass player who could sing, that sort of created a whole other lane for myself.
Yeah. So, obviously, talking about bass playing, who would you have said was who inspired you? Who were some of your influences that you were looking up to when you were starting to learn the bass?
Well, it was interesting because bands like The Who sort of introduced me to punk rock, and that sort of created a whole other rabbit hole of, guys like McCartney, obviously I was aware of. Of course, I've always laughed because the Beatles are not, they're kind of no joke. Like there's so many chords and so many changes happening. Yeah, it's really hard to jam the Beatles. You either know Beatles songs or you do not know Beatles songs. So obviously it was more about bands necessarily than individual players, like, trying to play Led Zeppelin songs or the Beatles or the Who. Again, John Entwistle, it's no joke. It's like a lead bass player. Once I got into punk rock bands like, The Clash and the Ramones and things like that, it sort of became more of like the kind of thing that we can do in someone's basement or in someone's garage together and make a horrible noise together that sort of sounds like music, and then becomes slightly less horrible as time goes by and eventually sounds sort of almost musical. But that kind of stuff really sort of opened doors. So when I say that, obviously guys like Tom Peterson from Cheap Trick, Dee Dee Ramone from the Ramones, these are the kind of people that I really focused on. And that sort of really kind of propelled me forward into a whole lot of other things, into all the other guys I was talking about. And then once I started playing, I immediately started playing in bands with guys way older than me. When I say way older, it could have been 5 years, but when you're 13, 14 years old, that's a significant, guys who can actually go and sit in the pub or buy beer. And I'm like not even like, I'm still in like junior high school, they call it in America and Canada. But I was, so that made me advance very quickly because now I got to keep up with these guys who've been doing this that much longer. So there's these sort of bursts that come along, because guys like me who sort of like, then all of a sudden you find yourself playing with Slash and now you got to step up again. You're kind of leveling up your whole life to kind of go keep up with who you're playing with. It's always, you don't want to be the biggest fish in that pool because everybody has to keep up with you. And I've always sort of benefited from being, okay, I got to step my game up to keep up with that guy, whoever he is. And, with that along the way, there were a million different influences there. A lot of the same principles are still there. I play bass with a pick, just like McCartney. I play it pretty low, just like a Ramone, low on my body, you know what I'm saying? And all that kind of stuff just kind of just was fundamentally there. And then as I moved forward, it became sort of picking up little pieces here and there. And, I play guitar, I write songs, I sing. So all these other sort of chapters are involved in there too. Play a bunch of things. I get around on keyboards. I get around on drums. Yeah. So it's kind of like one of those things where, because people often, because I have played guitar in other gigs, or I've been the singer in other gigs, and people are like, well, is he a bass player? Is he a singer? And I've never really spent much time worrying about any of that stuff. I really enjoy just playing music. So if I happen to be in a room with a bunch of guys and there's somebody's playing bass, I'll grab a guitar, no problem. Or if there's no one playing bass, then I'll grab the bass, and we'll play music together. It's all sort of relative to me.
I'm curious, what was your plan leaving high school? What did you want to do with your life? Or was it always music, or was there something else before that?
Well, that is sort of the blessing and the curse, is that I'd already been playing music in bands since I was a child. 13 years old, 14 years old. I was playing in bands, and they were older guys who we had started in the area that I lived in. You could go off on weekends and play high school dances, right? Or just on a Saturday night would be some sort of town event, a party that would be happening. So often my Fridays and Saturdays, we were in some like band from a small town, and we had an agent, and while other guys were pumping gas or bagging groceries for their high school job, my job was playing in a band on the weekends, and I was paid. And so my all of that was sort of predestined in a way, that when I just couldn't wait to get out of high school, because of course high school went to hell basically pretty fast, because all of my focus was on Just playing music. Yeah. So I didn't really spend a lot of time worrying about my grades and stuff like that. I graduated high school. I was ready to quit and go on the road immediately, because by this point, the agents that we had and that kind of stuff were ready to kind of send us out, and you could go out and just go on the road essentially, and I was like, I'm in, let's go. So when, my parents were really kind of, they were just sort of like, please just get your high school diploma, just get that. Because at least that way, if everything else goes sideways, at least you have that and you can figure it out. To me, it was sort of like, I didn't care one way or the other. It was sort of like, I'm going to play music and I don't really have a plan, and it was, so when I first went out on the road and we were making no money and, basically just roughing it, it was just a blessing to me. I was like, isn't this great? And as guys often these guys were older than me, they would be like starting to think about like this, they'd be like, this isn't for me. My girlfriend wants to get married and we want to have kids. Dad owns an accounting firm or something like that, and I should just get a job and or go to college or go to university or whatever. And that sort of became where I'd be like, that guy's crazy. He's going to leave this, sleeping in a van in the freezing cold. This is the greatest life. We were just basically gypsies, And then, so to me, it was just kind of like, it was all, I would imagine basically that might have happened to me too if I was suddenly 30 years old and still, but life sort of kept leveling up as I went along.
How do we look at all the bands and stuff? So I know there was The Age of Electric, Static and Stereo. You've done solo albums, Sin City Sinners. You've jammed, recorded with other musicians, toured with other musicians. Of course, there's Slash and the Conspirators. It all started in the 80s for you. Late 80s, 1989. So I'm thinking 37 years later, 2026, you're still rocking. See, when you think 37 years, it sounds like a long time. When you think back over everything that you've done, does it feel like a long time or has it went by quite quick?
It's weird because it kind of feels like two sides of the same coin. Yes, you sort of, as we're talking, I can't help but visualize those high school dances and things that I was playing. And that was, I was a kid. I couldn't drive a car. I couldn't go to the pub. I couldn't do anything. It was sort of like, we would play pubs all the time and they'd make us wait. Me and the drummer were both underage. So we would sit in the kitchen or in some sort of area. Yeah. And the band would play between sets. We would play sets, sometimes 2, 3, 4 sets a night. And the band was old enough to hang out in the bar, talking to girls, hanging out. And we're sitting in some kitchen area amongst all these crates and boxes and things like that. And it was just sort of, that seems like a million years ago, but it doesn't feel like as long ago as, like you say, almost 40 years ago. But then it's at the same time, some things that, like say 5 years ago can feel for some reason a lot foggier in my memory. Yeah. Like, oh yeah. Like, cause I have these great friends that post, they'll post like, 5 years ago today, this was happening. And I'll be like, that was 5 years ago. Sometimes it feels like that was 20 years ago. And sometimes it feels like it was last week. So it becomes really bizarre and really, really relative at the same time. Because I remember like guys around the age I am now, when I was younger, I would look up to them and just be like, kind of like, tell me more about all these, experiences, and now you suddenly find yourself, now you're that guy. Yep. And when you're the one telling, a story about something that happened, you've got these kind of younger people just kind of like listening to you. You're kind of like, what happened? And you're like, and you start to realize that, of course, I have accepted the fact that I am a veteran. Yeah. And that's perfectly cool to me. When you think back on it all, what do you think was your big break moment that had it not happened, we wouldn't be sat here today talking? Well, there's been a number of things along the way because, like anything, there are things that happen that, you would consider a break. And then along the way, there's often, because it's the music industry, there's things that come along that sort of can knock you back down, you know. And I think that it's kind of the poetic thing about showbiz, you know, is the fact that you can be, you know, riding high, and then a change in the tides, be it, you know, public taste or style of music, just shifts, and it can leave people behind. So along the way, you know, for whatever reason, when we formed the Age of Electric, was my first sort of, you know, recording act and that kind of stuff. We were very focused on the idea of being an original act and writing music and sort of going that way. And having the audacity to think that you can do any of these things in the first place is a little bit kind of mildly ridiculous for some kids from remote nowhere to just go like, we're going to do this and we're going to go on. And a lot of things came along the way that, you know, that worked to our advantage. I would probably pat each of us on the back, having the audacity to just kind of do it, and having the sort of tenacity to kind of just keep going, you know, even though the van broke down, and now what are we going to do? You know, that kind of stuff, all these little things that come along the way. And then you just keep pushing forward. And then even though we had sort of achieved our greatest success by 1997, we split up in 98 just due to, like, you know, we'd been doing it together. We were, you know, me and my brother, two other brothers. It was just sort of, we had been doing it for 10 years, and we just sort of, well, I guess 9 years really when I think about it. And just sort of, it just fell apart. But that's not unusual. I mean, bands like the Beatles, you know, they did a lot in a 10-year span before they kind of shut it down, or, well, I guess less than 10. And not to say we ever, I mean, there's obviously the added pressure of being a Beatle and that level of success. We didn't really have that, but there is something about achieving success that pulls it all apart sometimes. And so there's always, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, it's funny that you say that. I spoke with the guys in therapy, and also Ricky Warwick from The Almighty.
Sure.
And both bands, similar to yourself, they started late 80s. And when you look at what they'd done in the first 8 years, they were so unbelievably busy that both bands kind of almost fell apart.
Yeah.
They had to go on a break and then kind of regroup later on. But, you know, it's just, I think it's that thing. I think maybe a lot of bands, a lot of them do say now, see if we'd actually took a year off, but when you're young, you just want to keep going, and sometimes it's maybe not for the best as well.
Hey, it's Sean here from Alcotomic, and you're watching Slowhands Rock Talk Show, talking all things music.
Just a very quick message to say thank you for watching. It really is appreciated. If you could hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and remember to hit the notification bell. That way you won't miss any future episodes that come out. Now back to the video.
Well, a lot of people advise you, you know, due to momentum, and still to this day. I mean, you know, it's like, it's an interesting time now because of playing with Slash and seeing Alter Bridge and Tremonti and Miles Kennedy solo, Miles Kennedy with us. Everybody's kind of like, there's these cycles of like, this year is this, next year I'm doing that, the year after that. And there's sort of little bit of a takeaway game of like, if you want to see Alter Bridge, you better go see them right now, because it might be 2 more years, maybe 3 years till you see them again because of everybody being so busy. Whereas back then, and to some degree today, the momentum happens where you kind of feel like you have to keep driving it home. We got to go on the road, do all these shows, and we got to immediately go back in, write some songs and make a record and go right back on the road. And the pressure of that, living together, you know, in each other's pocket and all that is, you know, it just sort of gets tough. And then along the way, and it feels like the less successful you are, the more unbreakable that bond is in a way. And then as success starts to rear its head, suddenly there's somebody in one guy's ear saying, you don't need these guys, you're better than them. Or another guy in this guy's ear saying, like, you don't need these guys. And, you know, you're the one that has all the great ideas. And, you know, that sort of stuff starts to happen where, you know, one guy feels like we should go this way and another guy feels like we should go that way. And and then you throw into it money and all the other things that come along, which were never a consideration because you just didn't have it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, how is this money being split up? Who's getting what? Where is this going? Why is he getting less than me? Why are we getting more than him? Why is he getting more than me? And all those kind of things that go along. And it just starts to get kind of ugly and uncomfortable. And then it's business, but there's an all for one for all until, everybody's sort of like starving and you put some food on the table. You watch who will cut the other one's throat for some food.
Well, kind of similar in the same sort of line of questioning. What do you think is more difficult? Is it more difficult at the beginning of a band's career to get the band established and noticed? Or is it more difficult later on in the band's career trying to keep them fresh and relevant?
Wow. That's a very good question because I can only go by what I've been through. It's really hard to imagine what it's like now because, back in the day, you just put a band together and you played at your local venues.
Yep.
And you built an audience one person at a time. And hopefully along the way, you built a lot of people along the way. And then you could start going around and playing out of town and playing here and there. And hopefully one day Mr. Record contract shows up and something happens. But in the way it is today, with the internet and everything else, there's so many benefits to it, but there's a lot of sort of downsides to the fact that while you're putting out music, and fighting the algorithms of however that works, there's a gazillion other people doing the same thing. And they're often smarter than you are when it comes to how the internet works and how the system works and all that kind of stuff. So just like it was back in the day, there's a lot of times where I'm sure you and I could probably both bring up bands that we thought were amazing who just didn't happen because of A, B, or C. Mm-hmm. That's going to happen today. It's going to happen tomorrow. It's the nature of how this whole thing works. But it's really hard to say because I think like anything, the only advice I would ever give to anybody starting out is just, all you can do is just keep going. Just keep moving, keep pushing forward. And that means play as much as you can, write as much as you can, record as much as you can. Just keep doing it, keep putting it out. And if it's meant to be, people will show up. If it's meant to be, people will check out your music. If it's meant to be, people will like your music and opportunities will present themselves because of that.
Someone had asked me the other day, and it's kind of in line with exactly what you've just said there. What makes a band successful? Is it the ability? Is it songwriting? Is it just down to pure luck? Is it being in the right place at the right time? I don't know. Is it maybe it's a bit of everything? I've got to think songwriting has got to be up there because you don't need to be the most technically gifted player to write a good song. So I think you've got to be able to. Songwriting has got to be up there. Maybe a bit of luck, being in the right place at the right time. Maybe it's a combination of a few things.
I think it's kind of all that, I think honestly it always has been, I think that we can sit around and, like I said before, there's a million people out there that I've thought were incredibly talented and incredibly gifted that kind of didn't get the break that they probably deserved. And there's a number of reasons why that's the case.
Yeah.
Obviously you're right. The songs make kind of like the whole thing, like if Van Halen didn't have the songs, it just would have been a band with an amazing guitar player. It's kind of like, and that kind of goes all the way down. But from your point before, trying to keep something going or trying to keep something moving, there's certainly a lot of advantages that come from having established an act. Because we all know to this day, there's bands out there who have like one original guy because they can go out and book the band as a name that people recognize and they have a catalog of music that people enjoy. That's not a judgment. I understand the business better, as well as anybody else. But in saying that, it's sort of, there's so many things coming at you. And sometimes those things coming at you are shifts in taste, shifts, especially like witnessing the 80s into the 90s in real time. You know, we sort of were kids and we loved rock music. You know, we were from a remote area, so we actually had a pretty interesting hodgepodge of liking a lot of pretty diverse things. So, but obviously having a penchant for, you know, long-haired rock and roll and essentially what, you know, probably could have been easily termed as heavy metal. Even though we had pretty vast tastes, we would have probably been very easily sort of categorized as kids who liked heavy metal just because we had long hair and wore leather pants or something like that, you know. But you know, but so did The Cure and so did the Ramones, you know. So to us, it was sort of like we just loved rock and roll. Iggy Pop had long hair, you know. I mean, and he's the godfather of punk. So it was kind of like we went over to and then, you know, in witnessing bands who were an arena act last year who are now playing clubs. It's the cruelty of show business that's just sort of like. It's just the nature of what it is. Living in Las Vegas has always been very eye-opening because when I first came down here, sort of, you know, I would imagine probably through the 80s and probably through the 90s. I came much later than that, but I would imagine you would have driven around town and seen billboards for the Four Tops or some old, you know, the Spinners or some old 60s singing group. And you probably think to yourself, well, who the hell's in that? Those guys got to be 80 years old, you know? And now it's driving around looking up at 70s rock bands and going, well, who the hell's in that? Those guys got to be 80 years old. Yeah. And then you're starting to see that with 80s bands, and you'll see it with 90s bands, and eventually it'll be, it's just, exactly, yeah. And I would imagine that's just sort of the nature of, like a lot of bands, the Age of Electric is included in this list where something split up, and then the nostalgia aspect comes up. Yep. You know, next year we're facing the 30th anniversary of one of our biggest record, and we already made a great compilation of unreleased tracks for the 20th anniversary of that record. So I would imagine next year might just go by with no sort of like, you know, because what else can you do other than repackage it? Now it's in blue, you know, a blue vinyl, you know. But it's kind of like
I don't think Metallica can bring out the Black Album in blue though.
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I mean, I guess you might have some sort of maybe some live versions of the songs, but you could include. I don't know. You know how it is. It's these sort of the nostalgia of it. You know. Because I think then there's also the takeaway. Motley Crue keeps breaking up and reforming, you know, that the fact that you break up and then the demand builds up so that when you put it back together, everybody goes like, oh my God, Motley Crue's back. And you go, you know, and then you have, everybody feels this sort of compulsion to go see something that didn't exist a couple of years ago. So now it's back. And then you get other bands like, say, Def Leppard or something like that, who's just been going the whole time, you know, and sort of staying steady and building good business. And yeah, you know, there's a million different roads you can take. And the reason bands break up is, you know, bands like Motley Crue and all that kind of stuff is, you know, there's a million reasons why they're kind of coming and going.
Talking to bands, how did you cross paths with Slash? How did you end up playing in a band? It was Slash's solo band, essentially.
Well, our drummer is an old friend of mine. I've known him since the 90s. He was... I was doing the Sin City Sinners here in Vegas and was perfectly happy, honestly. Bought a house, you know, I was like... we were just kind of a fun Vegas thing. And I had sort of let go in a lot of ways of the idea of I'm an artist. I'm going to go... you know, change the world. I had sort of kind of been beaten up by an industry that's sort of like, you know, you're not 23 anymore. So, you know, you're kind of like, you just kind of get this weird feeling of like, well, I had a hell of a run, whatever, you know, and you find yourself putting something together in Vegas and it becomes very popular here and becomes successful enough to play bigger rooms and be doing stuff when you're like, okay, well, it's interesting to watch that sort of transition of quote unquote success in a different sort of way. But as I was doing that, Fitz went and got the gig with Slash. And I in no way sort of said, what about me? I was just sort of like, that's great. Good for you. And he jammed with them for a while, and there was some sort of issue. I don't know if the bass player was out or what happened, but then I got the call to come jam, and it was just that simple. It was like just that simple that they were sort of under the wire. They had appearances happening very quickly, like Jay Leno, The Tonight Show, and all that kind of stuff. And those are often the best times to get involved with people because they really aren't in a position, as long as you kind of like are decent enough, not to undercut my own abilities, but you just kind of get in, and if you're a good dude and you know the music and you can play it and you can add something to the show, then you're in. So the next thing I knew, it was just sort of, I was just there. It was overnight. Yeah.
If I was to ask you to describe in a few words each of your current band members in Slash's band, how would you describe each of the members in a few words?
And
you can be as polite or as unpolite as you want.
Well, I'll try not to be too impolite, but the Slash is very easygoing, very driven. Those are two diametrically opposed things to say, but he's a very casual California easygoing guy who is incredibly driven. As a guitar player, he's always playing guitar. Miles Kennedy is also a very easygoing, casual guy, but also driven in other ways. Obviously, I mean, his output of music since he's been with Slash alone, between Alter Bridge, SMKC, his solo work, he's sort of perpetually always moving forward as well. Fitz and I have known each other a long time. Fitz is more like a brother to me than a friend in a way. We're currently going out with Triumph, the Canadian band. We play in a thing called Toque together, our Canadian sort of tribute band. We play with Bruce Kulick from Kiss. And, so we're always sort of doing things together. Not always, but I mean, a lot of the time we sort of find ourselves, if I'm doing something or he's doing something and they need a guy, then we call each other. It's just the sort of way it goes. Yeah. Again, an incredibly talented guy. We refer to ourselves as musicians because he's sort of always yes, he's a drummer and an incredible drummer, but he also plays keyboards. He plays guitar. He plays bass. He's a great harmony singer. He's probably a great singer. He never really takes the lead. So I don't know, but he's very good at like that musical side. Frank is another very easygoing guy. Frank is probably the best kept secret in rock and roll, in my opinion. He's an incredible guitar player. I think he probably has a lot of great ideas. So he's young enough that I feel like we're still kind of discovering Frank Sidoris. But there's a reason why he's playing with guys like Wolfgang Van Halen and Slash, because he's an incredible player. He's a good hang and a good dude. It's sort of like, so in a lot of ways, Frank, is in some ways my favorite, only because we're both so silly and always looking for something to laugh about. And have that in common. So we often are sitting around goofing off, but it's an interesting thing because that conversation is, I spend most of my time with Fitz, because I don't see the other guys nearly as much. I just talked to Slash yesterday. We're sort of always in contact, but everybody's sort of off, he's in Guns N' Roses. Miles is in Alter Bridge. Frank is out with Wolfgang right now, and Fitz and I are both getting ready to do Triumph. So we're always sort of, doing other things until we find each other's in each other's pockets soon enough.
Yeah. How do you think those guys would describe you?
Wow. I don't know. I think they'd probably say always up for a laugh. I would like to think that they would say I'm always prepared. I'm the kind of guy that I sort of kill myself preparation wise. so that when I'm showing up for a rehearsal, I know, like right now, for example, I'm getting ready for this Triumph rehearsals that are coming up. There's a set list they give you. There's some suggestions on how the arrangements are going to go. But then I'm the kind of guy who goes back to the original recordings of the songs. I listen to every possible live version I can find of those songs because arrangements change.
Yeah.
This year this tour they were doing it like this, on this tour they were doing it like that. And you become a little bit of an aficionado on the way those songs go. So when Fitz and I started playing with Slash, we were very sort of almost religious about trying to play the songs as closely to Guns N' Roses as we could play them, or as closely to Velvet Revolver or the Snake Pit songs. We didn't want to kind of do this sort of like, I'm going to do it my way. It's sort of like, who are you? It's kind of like, just play the song and shut up,
Yeah.
So I would like to think that I try to bring something to the table, energy, being able to sing, trying to do the stage presence thing of being kind of an asset on stage, and try to be a good hang, and try and not be a pain in the ass. It's it's a big part of, I always say you'd rather hire a guy who's slightly less talented if he's not a drug addict, or B, has problems that, what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of very talented people out there who are going to not get called back because of, multiple reasons, but and a lot of less talented people who will get the call because they are, for lack of better words, a good hang. Sorry, I'm just getting phone calls and making them go away.
No, that's okay.
That's how important you are.
Knowing what you know now, see if you could go back and speak to your teenage self that was just about to leave high school. What would you say to them? What advice would you give yourself?
That's a good question. I honestly don't know that there's a lot that I could have told myself. I think, because you know how it is, like when you're younger, or even like a year ago, something that just seems like such a big deal is something you can barely remember. It's kind of like, it's like even like something like having your heart broken, and like, oh, I'll never get over this. And then a few years later, you're like, I can't believe I wasted that kind of time on that. And I think that, you don't know how, especially from a young person's perspective, because, when you're young, you have a lack of experience on how to deal with these things that are coming. There's probably a lot of things I probably would have passed along, as far as, say, something like the Age of Electric, that I don't think that I had the life experience to be able to know how to navigate that. Yep. So I think I probably would have said, had a lot of advice on what to do in that situation, because there was a lot of gigantic personalities that were at least ostensibly a democratic, but really, and no band is really democratic. And there's always going to be guys who are, chiefs and braves, or however you want to say that, where there are generals and there are soldiers. That's sort of the nature of how we're all wired. And that, but along the way, I think it's, and the same advice I would give to almost anybody is just keep going. There's a lot of things along the way that want to take you out. A lot of things along the way that make you, and I'll admit that there was probably 2 different times in my life, I'd have to go back and think about it, where I kind of thought, well, I had a good run. I started to have children, when I had children quite young, so I sort of had to juggle that. And a couple times along the way, you'd end up with a job that you never wanted to get, a job. Yeah. And sometimes someone would say to you something like, if you went and took this course, you're good at this job. If you went and took this course,
yep,
you could, move your way up the ladder and become, management or something like that. And in my mind, I'd be like, oh, hell no. Because if I do that, then you get yourself trapped into the income that creates. Now you're never getting out, Because I always, even though I had a day job or whatever, I would still have, like, I was playing in this or doing that, and always was available as a musician. And then it was sort of the idea that we, that I always kind of like, I'm doing this job because I'm trying to make an income to support my family, but this is not who I am, And I think that you just kind of have to stay the course, And I think that, I think a lot of the time, I think one of the biggest things I would have told myself is never question your own ideas, and never question your own taste, and never question your own big picture. I think that I did too much sort of thinking about like, well, what is this person going to think, or what do they think, or am I doing the right thing as far as the taste of whatever time frame I'm in? A lot of the time, an artist, the ones that really kind of seem to break through always have a vision and don't really care too much about what's going on. And they kind of just
trust their own instinct.
Exactly. And they do to love them or hate them, things like the White Stripes, when they came along, I was sort of like, there was such a left turn as far as what I knew from rock and roll music.
Yeah. That
I was like, but I think I was sort of, buzzed by their sort of like, this is what we do. So, it's kind of, and we're not really going to change it. So you can either enjoy it or whatever. It just seemed like this is not, not something we're really going to change. And I think that I always got a kick out of that. And I wish that in some ways I would have taken because along the way, when you have a vision or you have an idea, you start to get a manager in this ear and a producer in that ear. And the next thing you know, you're sort of like, this isn't what I had in mind. And you start to veer off, and it gets to be pretty far from what you wanted to do, or it can be. It's almost better to surround yourself. If you have an idea, to surround yourself with people who kind of help you with that idea and help you sort of, bring that to life. And I think that's one of the biggest things I would have told myself, because along the way I lost track of what I was doing, because I got kind of caught up because you can't help but get caught up in the game of like, is this going to be successful? And success is such an ambiguous word. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, well, what's success? You know what I mean? It's like a lot of the things that I did and didn't end up necessarily being quote unquote successful anyway. So if I had just done what I wanted to do, at least it would have gone that way. And I would have been like, well, I did what I wanted to do anyway. So it didn't work out, whatever,
But Todd, we're obviously March 2026, quite early on. So what is the plans for the rest of the year?
Well, so I've got upcoming, I've been sitting in town on a thing called Icons of Rock, which my friend Brett Fitz produces. And it's just a fun rock tribute act in town. And that's just been something fun to keep me from getting rusty. More. And I loved all the people doing it. It's a lot of fun. And then I've got I've got rehearsals coming up for Triumph right away. And then I go off to Florida to jump on a ship for the Underground Garage Cruise. Little Steven from the E Street Band, Bruce Springsteen's band, has a thing called the Little Steven's Underground Garage on 60 Sirius FM. And they have a cruise, and it's Social Distortion, and all these great artists are going to be on it. So I'm going on there to play with my friend Michael Monroe, who was the lead singer of Hanoi Rocks, which were a big deal to me when I was, and it's still a big deal to me, frankly. But Michael is this magical elf from a different time and a different land who I get to play with once in a while. So I go out with them for 4 days on a boat, come back, and go back into rehearsals in Florida with Triumph. And then we start our the Triumph 50th anniversary Rock and Roll Machine Reloaded 2026 tour from April till June. Yeah, so it's a good run through Canada and the US, and it's exciting. I mean, I'm being Canadian and growing up with bands like Triumph, who was a massive act when I was a kid.
Yep.
It's another one of those weird feathers in my cap that I've played with Slash and Bruce Kulick, who was the guitar player in Kiss when I first saw Kiss, and now Triumph is a big deal. So that's the big thing. Toque starts up again in the summertime. We're always doing summer festivals through Canada. We got 1 or 2 appearances in the US, and then 2027 is slotted as SMKC / Feature Mouse Canadian Conspirators time.
Yep.
So that's my life sort of spoken for until 2028.
Yeah, you're a busy man, but before you go, I'm going to ask you some fun questions.
Please.
I'll ask the questions, you tell me what pops into your head, okay? Imagine you could go back in time, anywhere in the world. What is the one concert that you wish you could have attended?
Which concert? Man. I guess I probably wish I was at the Cavern Club watching the Beatles in the early days. That'd be pretty cool. The other thing that popped into my mind was seeing, I don't know, like Queen at Wembley or something like that. That would be rad.
Similar question. See if you could go back and attend one of your own gigs as a spectator. Is there a particular gig that stands out in your mind that you think that would have been a cool one to be in the audience to watch myself and the band on stage?
Jeez. That's a good question. I don't know. I think that, in some ways, we've had so many cool people like Alice Cooper and stuff get up on stage with us. Yeah. So I guess one of those maybe. It's hard to say. We did this show in Mumbai, India.
Right.
And we hadn't played things like Sweet Child of Mine in a long time because Guns had gotten back together. So we'd sort of like started to focus less on Guns N' Roses, Guns N' Roses hits anyway, and just sort of doing more like our own stuff. And I'm talking about with Slash. But that particular show, there's footage from that show from like way up in an apartment building, looking down sort of at this sort of stadium, and the whole audience is singing "Sweet Child of Mine." And I remember just being like blown away by that. South America too is pretty wild, but yeah, it's something like that probably.
That's fine. Does the perfect album, start to finish, exist? And if so, what is the album?
Well, Appetite for Destruction would be high on that list. Probably Back in Black is pretty high on that list. There's probably a number of them that I'll be later in the day, I'll be like, this one, that one. But those two first come to mind.
That's right. Sure. Talking about Slash and the Conspirators, you've got a dead body in the back of your car. At 4 o'clock in the morning, you need help disposing of this body, no questions asked. Which member of the band are you phoning for help and why?
In a weird way, Slash comes to mind because he's such a horror movie guy. Right. But I don't know that he's as dubious enough to kind of go along with such a crazy endeavor. But I'll just say him.
That's right. Do you have a favourite album cover? Is there one that comes to mind straight away?
Album covers? Jeez. Well, you ask good questions. Nothing pops into my head, actually. It's sort of funny that you say that and I come from an age where that was a really important thing because even these days it's sort of like, because everything's in streaming form, it's like, who cares? It's an afterthought. But I used to, I would say probably Kiss Alive 1. I think that's the one that I stared at the most as a child, just staring at this essentially staged live shot, Peter Criss with the cross drumsticks and the guys are all doing the big guitar thing.
No, that's right.
Yeah, we'll say that one. That's a good one.
Thousands and thousands of great songs written and recorded across the years by different bands, different artists. What's the one song you wish you could have sat in the recording studio to witness the band record the song?
Wow. Well, I always say my favorite all-time song is Jumpin' Jack Flash by the Rolling Stones, mostly because it's the first song I ever remember hearing. And I really believe that sometimes that song sort of caused all of that too, by the way.
Yep.
I think that, as much as but in retrospect, I've been to Abbey Road Studios and I walked in with the guys, we walked in and every hair on your body just stands up when you walk into that room where the Beatles recorded. So I would imagine probably something of the Beatles, She Loves You, or I Want to Hold Your Hand, just sitting there watching them do that would be pretty mind-boggling.
That's fine. And last question for yourself. The answer could change daily, but for today, who is your Mount Rushmore when it comes to bands? Who is the 4 bands for yourself that you just love?
Oh, well, my go-to answer is usually something like Guns N' Roses, Kiss, and the Ramones. were sort of my three most important bands. But it's a long list beyond that, so I would imagine the Beatles would have to be on there as well. You know, the Stones, the Clash. You know, don't get me going. We'll be here all day. I've got extra heads on that mount now.
That's fine. But Todd, thank you so much for coming on today, speaking to myself.
Thank you.
ToddKerns.com is your website. Obviously, you've got the clothing on there as well as music, any up-to-date news as well. You're on social media. I do always encourage people, you know, go onto the website, check out whether you like streaming, whether you like to download, whether it's buying the physical copy. You know, keep music alive, keep doing that, but go along to the gigs. That's the important thing. Buy a T-shirt, buy some merchandise. You know, it's all good, but they can follow you on social media. And next time you're over in Scotland, I'll give you a shout, and I'll come along and see you rocking. But thank you so much for coming on. It's been nice talking to you.
You as well. Take care.
Cheers, pal. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Thank you.